But as Tina said, I've written some notes this afternoon. It's a fast-moving situation. We all have to collectively work out our politics around this. I encourage everyone to add points, but also to raise questions or arguments. We want everyone feeling clearer and more confident to oppose what's happening. Now, Israel's war that it's launched in Lebanon is unleashing incredible horrors and incredible levels of hypocrisy. You know, the airwaves resound to proclamations of solidarity, not with the victims of genocide, where there are 42,000 bodies that we know about, how many undiscovered in Gaza, 90,000+ injured. Don't rush over that figure. I mean, that's probably people with limbs blown off, eyes lost, life-changing and so on. Absolutely horrible genocide that's taking place. It's not proclamations of solidarity with the 1 million Lebanese people who are fleeing or have fled their homes. I mean, think about that. To go home tonight and think, you have to leave your house. Where would you go? How would you get there? Think about this, right? Not with victims of US-made bunker buster bombs that have been dropped by Israel in residential areas in places like Beirut. Not with the 29 villages and towns in southern Lebanon that have been issued evacuation orders by Israel. The proclamations of solidarity from Starmer and Kamala Harris and all the rest of them is, of course, with Israel. You know, incredible levels of hypocrisy. I mean, you've probably all been seeing this and raging at the radio or social, whatever it is. You know, one of them that leapt out at me was Kamala Harris, who said, Iran is a destabilising force in the Middle East. I mean, I think that's a misspelling of the first word there. You know, extraordinary judgment. The endless calls that we've had over the last few weeks as this has been building up for restraint, but the restraint only applies to Israel's opponents, never to Israel itself, it would seem. Starmer, of course, has predictably but disgustingly repeated his, Israel has a right to defend itself. And again, what do you make of a right? Welcome, friends, come in. What do you make of a right to defend yourself that only applies to Israel, doesn't apply to any of those of its victims? It's actually it's a right that imperialism gives to itself and to its allies, to say only the Western powers have the right to defend it. Everyone else presumably has to be defenceless. Actually, it's a deeply racist assumption that's taking place. Robert Jenrick, who's he? Apparently he's the person that's most likely to end up as the next Tory leader, if you care. What does he say? He said it was an unprovoked attack. An extraordinary statement. Unprovoked. This is the Iranian response. Sorry, he was referring to the Iranian missile salvo. Well, it's unprovoked if you exclude the fact that a central Iranian ally, Hezbollah, has seen its Hassan Nasrallah, its long-term leader, its leadership cadre, assassinated by Israel. If you ignore the fact that just a few months ago, the Iranian embassy in Syria was bombed, that senior Iranian revolutionary... I mean, imagine if Putin knocked out the British embassy in Poland and assassinated the number 2 in the British Army. What would be the hypocrisy is staggering and infuriating, right? This is the reality that's taking place. Now, the meeting title talks about a regional war has begun. That's a reality, isn't it? It's shocking but not surprising. I don't think any of us are really surprised that this is taking place. I think only its scale, its intensity, and the destruction that results is unknown. Will Iran, for example, really want an all-out confrontation with Israel? Will it get a choice? Right? It may be forced on it. We don't know all of the dynamics and variables, but a regional war has begun. We have to reject the kind of argument that frames it as democracy, that means, Israel and us, versus terrorism, and this kind of utterly dishonest framing. Israel is a terror state. This is a reality, and it's an apartheid regime where democracy only applies for some people, not for the vast majority of Palestinians, and so on. And this has to be repeated. It's a settler colonial state that cannot be given the name of a democracy. And the real agent of destabilisation and war is of course Israel. And actually, one of the things that's also so cynical about the Kamala Harris statement, says Iran is the agent, is that America knows it's Israel, right? They're nervous about what Israel, it's not necessarily what they want Israel to do. They know the reality that it's Israel that is the aggressor and driving a process of regionalisation of the war. And I think, we should be clear that Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas and so on, they have a right to resist. They have a right to defend themselves. That is not some monopoly of the Western imperialism. And in fact, there is no right to dominate, to oppress, to ethnically cleanse, to commit genocide. The right to resist and fight back actually only resides with the oppressed to fight back against their oppression. But it's not just Israel. Who enables Israel? And we all know this, but we have to keep on reminding people, we have to keep on coming back to it. It's the US. The US mutters some stuff about, perhaps we want a ceasefire, but every time Israel launches these attacks, you come out in solidarity, and more importantly, that the massive flow of military aid and arms continues, then guess what? Netanyahu rather makes a realistic calculation. They might moan, but they'll back me, and they won't cut off the arms. And he's not wrong about that. So they act with impunity, right? So it's the UK. Starmer rather. It's actually a little bit of a reflection of the strength of our movement. They've had to, one or two components aren't going through, but the vast bulk of British arms are still continuing to help fly those F-35s, that are bombing over Beirut and all the rest of it. So we have to be clear about that imperialist context. Now, that reflects itself in some of the sort of military power, possibly even superiority that Israel, the pager attacks, right? An act of terror, but quite sophisticated by Israel. The decapitation, the assassination of Hezbollah. Believe me, there will be people sitting in the Pentagon, and no doubt, who, they might have the odd reservation about whether Israel's tactics are right, but they'll be admiring. They say, this is why we back them, isn't it? This is why we can rely. This is why we need Israel to keep control of the Middle East. Here's the difficulty, though, for Israel. The kind of bombardments, the terror tactics, the shock and awe will not be enough. I think we can be confident, will not be enough to achieve their objectives of destroying Hezbollah. That will require boots on the ground. It will require, here's another use, it's ground incursions, isn't it? No, it's not. It's called an invasion, right? They will be forced to invade, and that has all of the logic of occupation. And again, and we don't have to go into ancient history, and we don't have to leave the Middle East, although we could, to see examples where a state has had an initial military success, but as it's forced into an occupation, it finds that it's drawn into a bloody war of attrition and often suffers defeat. Think of the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq. Quick victories, and then drawn into wars of occupation where they were defeated. This is the honest truth that the British public's never quite told. Britain and America were defeated in Iraq and Afghanistan. On the face of it, much weaker countries and so on. Look at Gaza. The truth is, one of the things driving the escalation is that Israel finds itself in an impasse in Gaza. It can slaughter civilians, and my God, it is slaughtering civilians. Has it defeated Hamas? I don't think it has. Right? And that's the problem that they face. And then there's Israel's own history in the Lebanon, which may be less familiar to people. Israel in the early 1980s, for example, all that stuff about, somehow if it's all Hezbollah's fault, and if Hezbollah didn't exist, it would all be... No. Israel's been attacking Lebanon long before Hezbollah, just like it didn't start on October the 7th, with the Palestinians. In 1982, Israel invaded the Lebanon to smash its main enemy then amongst the Palestinians, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was based in the Lebanon. It led to the notorious massacres of Palestinians in refugee camps in Shabra and Shatila, which the Israelis didn't get their hands directly. They allowed their fascist Christian allies in the Lebanese state to conduct a massacre that took place. But over the following 20 years, a resistance movement, particularly by Palestinians, but also amongst the Shias, who were the great losers in the sectarian Lebanese state created by the French, which would ultimately lead to Hezbollah, drove them out. And in the war in 2006, 17 years ago, Israel found itself defeated, probably defeated for the first time, I think, since 1948 by Hezbollah, and they're now looking for revenge. So I think that the fate of Israel's military attacks is yet to be decided. I think they're going to find it a lot more difficult. Now, here I want to say something about resistance, because I think that we have to be clear that it can't just be about military resistance. Right? I think the missing element that we're seeing is popular revolt. It's interesting. I do recommend people there. Simon Asaf, who writes for Socialist Work, I think there's an article in this week's paper. He's written in the International Socialism. He's a Lebanese British socialist. And he again and again makes the point, in 2006, it wasn't just Hezbollah, there was a popular mobilisation, a revolt amongst ordinary people across Lebanon, across the different communities that helped drive Israel out. This is what we need to see in Lebanon now. It's also what we need to see across the whole region. This is the missing ingredient. I think people have been a bit shocked. I think some people thought, Hezbollah would be able to take on Israel directly and so on. They've clearly been shaken by this. The key is popular resistance. Popular resistance in countries like Jordan, where the king will make noises attacking Israel, but then repress protests in solidarity with the Palestinians and allow Jordanian military assets to help shoot down the Iranian rockets to protect Israel. Utter hypocrisy. The Egyptian regime, which is probably sitting on a powder keg of anger and sympathy for the Palestinians, will it break through? But not just in those openly pro-Western states. We need to see popular mobilisation in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iran itself. This is the key to defeating the imperialist powers and defeating Israel. What's our role here? Because I think the global solidarity movement that we've seen over the last year is another vital leg of resistance to what's taking place in the Middle East. In Britain, we're heading to a year now of the genocide. We've seen an extraordinary movement that's taken place over that period of time. We fended off attacks. People like Suella Braverman tried to, drive the movement off the streets and so on. I think all the evidence, certainly all the polling, suggests that the vast majority of people in Britain agree with us, actually. Maybe not every detail, but they sympathise with the Palestinians. I think it's the establishment who supports Israel, and a minority, and a shrinking minority, who find it harder and harder to justify what Israelis do. The question is, how can we translate that into a movement that's even bigger, even more vibrant, even more militant to increase the pressure? That's what we have to also think about and discuss. We want to attack and denounce what Israel and take up, but we have to think, how do we build this movement further? The demonstrations, the big national don't have to continue. To be honest, I think they will continue. I don't really doubt that at all. There's another one coming up and so on and so forth. We may have to face down further attempts by the police and so on to ban. We have to do all that, and so far we have done all that. The question is, how can we develop new fronts and new forces in that movement? And that's not something that is challenging. One of the fronts we have to keep on developing is about taking that solidarity with the Palestinians into the workplace and into our trade unions. And to be honest, this is a big challenge. It's very good that at the TUC, where all the national unions gather annually, they passed a motion, which one of our comrades put, saying there should be a day of action. In other words, that when Stop the War is called for days of action in the workplace, it should have the official backing of the union movement. That's on the 10th of October. What's that? Completely lost track. 8 days' time. The truth is, there are some movements I can see. The fact that Unison has actually put it on their website, it's helpful. It helps when you're arguing for. The truth is, there's a big gap between the verbal commitment or the general secretary who turns up at the demos. Good. Not all of them do. So good to. But there's a gap, isn't there, between that mobilisation. It's not easy. We have to keep doing it, but it feels a bit like attrition. We have to keep going at that. However, it also seems to me there are a couple of places where we can expect new forces. The demonstration of last week in London, over Lebanon, yeah, perfect. It's interesting, they said, one of the comrades who was on it told me that there was all the speeches of stop the war, good, but a bit routine, absolutely. He said down the other end of Whitehall was 2,000 young Lebanese and Arabs, youth. London has a big Arab population. There's a new sense of new forces. And I remember like 2006, it had a different dynamic as well. So maybe we'll see new forces enter the battle. The other thing is universities. Universities are about to go back. The encampments that spread from Colombia through the US and here in May or something, were electrifying and inspiring to many people. The truth is, I think that too often they began to turn too inwards and too just focused on the university management, who are part of the problem, but they're part of a bigger problem with Israel, the British state, and imperialism and so on. We want to see a revitalised student movement in solidarity with the Palestinians. There have been protests at some universities today over what's happening there. But there have to be launching pads for drawing in the whole student body and the staff and the wider society. This is possible, but it will have to be fought for and argued for. And finally, as well as doing all of that, we have to continually raise the question that this is a brutal and horrific expression of an imperialist system rooted in capitalism. It's the system itself, of which Israel is a part, that we have to target. There's tensions now, clearly, that have been building up between the West and Israel and Iran. We have a war between NATO and Russia that is entering a new and dangerous phase and escalating in Ukraine. Don't think that these two theatres will just stay completely separate. Beyond that is the escalating tensions between the two biggest and most powerful states in the world, the US and China. This is an incredibly dangerous world, let alone climate change, let alone poverty, let alone all of these other questions about what's happening in our society. And we have to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, with the Lebanese, but we also have to raise the question of targeting a system that can allow the scale of oppression and escalating war.